Hello friends, hope you're doing great. Today you'll learn how to trade trend channels. I have traded QQQ options with this strategy many times. Results are excellent. As usual, this will be our technical teaching video with a couple of examples. In our next video, you'll watch real trading examples and you'll have no question in your mind. If you are settled, let's start. First of all, let's understand what is a proper trend channel. A steady price action between two lines in one direction. This is how a proper trend channel comes into existence. The upper line is called a trend resistance line. The bottom line is called a trend support line. So basically, the price is swinging between trend support and trend resistance. As you notice, it's simple to identify. So what kind of trends are there? Let's look at that. There are three types of trends: uptrends, sideways trends, and downtrends. I rarely trade sideways trends. I always look for a market direction or reversals to trade. Uptrends and downtrends are quite straightforward. When price starts to swing and makes higher highs and higher lows, the asset creates an uptrend. Vice versa, if the price makes lower highs and lower lows, it's called a downtrend. However, not every swinging move confirms trend or trend channels. I'll teach you how to confirm a trend channel before entering a trade in a bit. One more thing. When you draw trend lines, you draw a trend support line first if you're checking for an uptrend or sideways trend. If you're checking for a downtrend, you should draw the trend resistance first. Now, let's look at best time intervals to trade this strategy. Which time frames or intervals can you use with this trend channel trading strategy? Practically, you can use it at any time interval. However, a decade of experience taught me this. Every indicator and strategy becomes less and less reliable when you go in lower time frames. But this is not a universal rule because every trader is quite different. All kinds of trading depend on your emotional intelligence and experience. So, try this trend channel trading technique in every time frame and check it out if it suits you. Now, 1 week time frame suits investors. These are generally rich investors who do not care about daily fluctuations. While we traders sweating daily and biting our nails, these people only sweat from tanning in their yachts. 1 day time frame is mostly for people who love swing trades. If you have a full-time work and you are not able to check the markets every day, I think 1 day time interval is right for you. Anything below 1 day is for buying and selling quickly. So you will have to check your positions quite often. If you are a scalper, well, even the trend trading is part of price action trading. I prefer bull flag and other types of breakout tradings for scalping. But this is a personal choice. I think it's time to learn my 4-step trend trading technique. My trend channel trading strategy is quite simple actually. Step 1. Confirm trend channel. Confirming a trend channel depends on price movement, which we will learn soon. Step 2. As always, pullback breakout confirmation. If you follow my channel, you should already know my #1 trading technique of all times is pullback breakouts. Because it's simple and results are excellent. Step 3. Confirm Mete histogram and momentum. This is an optional step. To be honest, the number of indicators that I use is quite few. However, I enjoy Mete histogram. I'm also developing a very special momentum indicator. You can see it on my Twitter account. And Mete histogram data is part of it. Step 4. Confirm entry. If you know me, even the moon strikes to the earth, I never touch a trade before confirming an entry. Don't worry, we will learn it in detail. Let's start. Confirming a proper trend channel is very easy, nothing complicated. We need the price to touch resistance and support lines 2 times minimum. More touches, much stronger trend. So, 2 is the bare minimum for us. However, If I am trading an uptrend, my main focus is on trend support line mostly. Those price touches should be really clear at this trend support line. If it's a downtrend, I'm focusing on trend resistance instead. Don't worry, as you know, this is my technical teaching video. I'll go over a couple of examples here. However, I'll cover many real trading examples in my next video. Please subscribe to the channel so you'll not miss it. Okay, let's check out pullbacks and breakouts. Pullbacks are little corrections against the main trend direction. As you know, the mainstream media, they get crazy when a correction happens. Like, oh, we are crushing. But corrections and pullbacks are quite healthy. Actually, I become worried if I do not see a correction, because constant pumps are much more dangerous. So as you can see, if the price moves from resistance to support, it's a pullback. A small downtrend in a mega uptrend. This is how I trade. I wait for these pullbacks and then breakouts from these pullbacks. A very easy method to trade. I use this technique with QQQ ETF by buying options. At the bottom, you can see Mete histogram. Again, this is optional, but I like looking for momentum before entering a trade. First of all, I do not use crossovers and moving averages to trade with Mete, because they are lagging too much for me. Mete histogram is still based on moving averages, but the histogram gives a great signal about momentum, much faster than moving average lines. Okay, as you can see, you can confirm the end of pullbacks and an upward momentum in the Mete histogram. This gives me an extra layer of comfort. The only thing left is waiting for breakouts and entry candles. My pullback breakout entry technique is a well-known and proven technique. I'm entering a trade when a candlestick beats the pullback breakout candlestick's high. Simple and clean. Let's check this example. As you can see in this zoomed out chart, our pullback is very clear. First of all, wait for a breakout from the pullback. Now it's right here. Okay, so we wait for the first next candle that beats the high of the pullback breakout candle. As you can notice, it's here. This candlestick is my entry candlestick. Where you place your stop loss order depends on you. If you are willing to take higher risks and not day trading or scalping, placing your stop loss at the bottom of pullback is a great idea. However, if you wanna get in and out, a quick trade with minimal risk, you may place your stop loss order the moment of the pullback breakout or at the pullback breakout candle's low. Okay, I placed my take profit order at 2R as usual. As you can see, a very simple trend channel trading technique. Let's check one more example very quickly. Zoomed out the chart so you can see better. This is our pullback. This is the pullback breakout candle. This is our entry candle. This time placing the stop loss order at the low of the pullback breakout candle. And my take profit order is at 2R, as you can see. Nice, a very clean trade. If you're a stock trader in the United States, I would like to show you a very useful way of finding and scanning stocks with trend channels. This website is called FINVIZ, and I'm at the screener section. Now I'll go step by step. I select signal as a channel up, because I mainly search for long positions. Then I change countries to the USA. Next, I select optionable, because I mainly trade options. This step depends on you. If you do not trade options, do not select it. Then I want an average volume of over 100,000, because more volume is better for trades, so you can quickly buy and sell them with lower spreads. Then I select relative volume over 1. I select this because I need a recent volume action in the stock. Then I select performance as today up because I need green candles. When I open a long position, I mostly look for a green candlestick to place my entry. Okay, as you can see, the results are great. FINVIZ already draws trend resistance and supports for us. Look at these trend channels and pullbacks. So many trade opportunities. Great pullback breakouts. Okay folks, I hope that you have truly understood how to trade trend channels with my 4-step trading strategy. Please stay tuned because next video is all about real-world trading examples of this trend channel trading technique. Please subscribe to the channel so you'll not miss it. Please take care and see you soon.